The most important factor in school shootings and mass killings is the gender of the perpetrator, because they're overwhelmingly perpetrated by men, young men, and boys. You would think that such an elemental truth would be front and center in the mainstream conversation, but it isn't. Hi, my name is Jackson Katz, and I'm an educator, an author, and a social activist, and the area of most of my focus is preventing men's violence against women. If you don't buy the argument that this is really centrally about gender, can you imagine if 99% of school shootings were done by girls? Can you imagine anybody talking about guns and mental illness as the causes without first talking about the fact that 99% of the shooters were girls? I don't think people would talk about anything other than that, at least initially. But because boys and men represent the dominant group, we rarely even talk about that. We go immediately to secondary factors. Girls have every bit the mental health challenges that boys do and young men do. Girls have every bit the access to guns that boys do and young men do. But they don't do 50% of the shootings, do they? And I don't believe that men and boys are born genetically predetermined to be abusive towards women or towards other men and boys. I think it's something that we teach them. I think that's something that we socialize into them, and we can do better than that. So the challenge for those of us who are activists is not just running from one incident to the next, but actually trying to figure out, okay, how can we, yes, take care of victims and survivors? How can we hold offenders accountable? But how can we change the social norms in the society that help to produce these predictable outcomes? Because until we do that, honestly, we're just running from one case to the next. If you're saying toxic masculinity is the problem, but you're only focused on how that plays out in individuals and don't see it as a social force that's much larger than that, then it limits our understanding of what the solutions can be. The same system that produces men who abuse women produces men who abuse other men and men who abuse themselves. And you know, the primary victims of most forms of violence, with the exception of sexual violence, are men and boys. When it comes to murder, attempted murder, assault, aggravated assault, gay bashing, bullying, men and young men are the primary victims of these crimes and abuses, as well as the primary perpetrators. So it's in men's immediate self-interest to address this stuff. And for men and young men who are concerned about creating a healthier society, those of us especially who are fathers or adult men in positions of leadership and mentoring, I think it's hard to think of something more important than thinking critically about how our culture defines manhood and how we can make that healthier, both for each other as well as for women and girls and for the next generation.